Every superpower believes it is the exception. Spain believed it. Britain believed it. The Soviet Union believed it. Each believed history would bend for them. It never did. For over 500 years, every dominant empire has followed the same invisible script: rise, excess, decay, collapse. No matter the century, no matter the flag. This is not a theory, it's not politics. It's not a prediction, it's a pattern. And that pattern has now entered its most dangerous phase inside the United States. The phase where empires still look powerful, but their internal systems have already begun to fail. You've seen this before, even if you didn't realize it. It played out in Spain when silver flooded the economy and hollowed out its currency. In Britain, when debt and war quietly drained the pound. In the Soviet Union, when centralized control turned into paralysis. Different eras, same death cycle. And the United States? It didn't hesitate. It walked straight through the door. This isn't a prediction, it's a diagnosis. The symptoms are no longer subtle. They're everywhere. A political system that can't govern itself. An economy addicted to debt and illusion. A culture that no longer agrees on what it's for. History has seen this pattern before, repeatedly. Every great power begins the same way, with production, discipline, functioning institutions, and a shared sense of purpose. And every great power ends the same way, when those foundations rot from the inside. The cycle is brutally simple. A nation rises. It dominates. It grows complacent. It borrows from its own future. It turns inward. It fractures. And then it breaks. This has nothing to do with one president, nothing to do with one party. Empires don't collapse because of personalities. They collapse because of structure. What you're watching is a historical rhythm, as reliable as gravity. The warning signs are always the same: financialization replacing production, debt replacing discipline, internal conflict replacing external purpose, narrative replacing reality. At this stage, the empire still looks powerful. That's what makes it dangerous. Decline doesn't announce itself with weakness. It announces itself with denial. And once you understand this cycle, one thing becomes clear. The United States is not approaching a crossroads. It has already chosen a path. History has placed the same signposts it always does, and they are unmistakable. In this video, you'll see the exact stages every superpower passes through, why they always misread the warning signs, and which phase America has just crossed into, the one no empire has ever escaped. Because collapse doesn't begin with explosions. It begins with patterns. The pattern. Before we get into America's current mess, you need to understand the map we're using. This isn't some fringe theory. It's a framework built on the work of historians and analysts, most famously laid out in recent years by investor Ray Dalio, who charted the rise and fall of global powers over the last 500 years. This superpower death cycle isn't about a single cause of collapse. It's about a sequence of stages that, once they get going, feed on each other in a downward spiral. The cycle usually kicks off right after an empire hits its peak. It starts when the very things that made a nation powerful begin to slowly rot away. The Dutch Empire in the 17th century, the British in the early 20th century, and the Soviet Union in its last years all followed a similar script. They became victims of their own success, and their greatest strengths morphed into their biggest weaknesses. What's unnerving is how consistent this pattern is. It always moves from overconfidence to overspending. From a financial system that's totally detached from reality to a manufacturing base that gets hollowed out. And it all leads to a final stage where the internal fights become so toxic that the nation can't even solve its most basic problems anymore. Different cultures, different centuries, different technologies. The same failure sequence. Every time. The United States is showing every single symptom. The proof isn't in one headline. It's in the crushing weight of all of them put together. Stage 1. The illusion of permanence. Every great power that falls first buys into a powerful delusion, the belief that its dominance will last forever. For the United States, this mindset was forged in the fire of World War II. With the rest of the industrialized world in ashes, America stood alone. In 1945, the US made up about half of the world's entire economic output. It had a monopoly on the atomic bomb and controlled the global financial system. This wasn't just being number one, it was a level of supremacy the modern world had never seen. This period of incredible power created a national belief in American exceptionalism, the idea that the rules of history just don't apply to us. Much like the Roman elite, who couldn't imagine a world without Rome at its center, Americans started to see their top dog status as a birthright. This mindset is the first and most critical stage of decline. Invincibility warps priorities. It shifts from making things to buying things, from investing to speculating, from building for the future to living for the now. The hard work of maintaining a productive economy gets pushed aside for the easier, sexier path of just managing wealth. The nation starts living off its reputation, assuming its credit card will never get declined and its currency will always be king. You can see this in the decades-long pivot of the American economy, away from making things and toward finance and services. The focus moved from the factory floor to Wall Street. This is a classic symptom. The British Empire did the same thing in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, focusing on the financial power of London while its industrial heartlands rusted away. This illusion of permanence breeds a dangerous combination of arrogance and complacency. It causes a nation to ignore its rising rivals and write off its internal problems as just temporary glitches, not systemic rot. It allows for debt to pile up, infrastructure to crumble, and education to slide, all while telling itself, "Don't worry, we're number one." But history is a graveyard of nations that thought they were the exception. This belief in invincibility is the soil where all the seeds of decline are planted. Stage 2. When expansion becomes overstretch. The second stage of the cycle is when an empire's promises start to outstrip its ability to pay for them. What used to be a network of powerful assets becomes a tangled web of expensive liabilities. For America, this is all about military overstretch. After the Soviet Union collapsed, America was the last superpower standing. Its unipolar moment. The smart move would have been to take a victory lap, pull back, and enjoy the peace dividend. Instead, we did the exact opposite. America's military commitments exploded. Interventions became more frequent, and the job of the military went from national defense to global cop and nation builder. The US now maintains hundreds of military bases all over the world, a footprint that looks eerily similar to other empires at their most overextended. The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan are textbook examples. They started as focused responses to 9/11s but morphed into 2-decade-long occupations with vague, ever-shifting goals. The initial missions were accomplished quickly, but then they crept into an unwinnable and wildly expensive project of trying to socially engineer foreign countries. This constant state of global intervention has a staggering price tag. It directly fuels the deficits that rot the economy from the inside. Money that could be invested in roads, research, and schools here at home is instead spent on maintaining a global military empire. And it's not just a financial cost, it's a strategic one. The nation's focus stays pointed outward, obsessed with projecting power, while the actual sources of that power, a strong economy, a unified people, and a functional government, are left to decay. Just like the British Empire after the World Wars, the United States is stuck with the bill for a global security system it can no longer comfortably afford. Old allies become drains on our resources, and the role of leader of the free world becomes a trap. The empire has to spend more and more just to keep things from falling apart, which only speeds up the financial decay that makes the final collapse inevitable. Overstretch is the point where the cost of having an empire is finally greater than the benefit. Stage 3. When money stops representing reality. This is the stage where you can't ignore the economic rot anymore. The empire, weighed down by military spending and a shrinking industrial base, turns to a magic trick to keep the party going. It just prints money and racks up debt at a speed completely disconnected from anything of real value it's producing. The United States crossed this line decades ago, but lately, the process has hit terrifying new speeds. The US national debt first hit $1 trillion in 1981. Today, as of late 2025, the total gross national debt has soared past a mind-boggling $38 trillion. That's not just a big number. It's a sign of a fundamental break between our money and reality. We are living on borrowed time, paid for with borrowed money. The most dangerous part of this isn't even the debt itself, it's the interest. Projections show that annual interest payments on the debt are on track to top $1 trillion in 2026. This isn't abstract economics, It's money no longer available to hold society together. Think about that. $1 trillion a year, not spent on building anything, not on research, not on education, but just to pay the interest on money we've already spent. This is the financial equivalent of a terminal diagnosis. It creates a debt-death spiral, where you have to borrow more money just to pay the interest on the money you already borrowed. This trick, debasing the currency, is as old as empires themselves. The Romans did it by mixing cheap metals like copper into their silver coins to pay for their armies and public handouts. Eventually, people realized the coins were junk and faith in the currency collapsed. Today, the process is fancier. We call it quantitative easing and deficit spending, but the result is the same. The value of your money is silently stolen through inflation, acting as a hidden tax on every person and every country that holds US dollars. As analysts like Dalio have shown, this phase always creates enormous gaps between the rich and the poor. While the stock market can rocket upwards, fueled by all this printed money, the real economy, for most people, stagnates. This growing chasm between the haves and have-nots pours gasoline on the social resentments that drive the next, and most dangerous, phase of decline. Okay, quick pause. We're covering a lot, and we're about to hit the most critical and most controversial stage of this whole cycle. If this breakdown is giving you a new way to see what's going on in the world, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We go deep like this every week, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Stage 4, dependence replaces self-sufficiency. This fourth stage is the logical next step. As an empire's currency becomes the world's currency and its financial games take over, its own products and its own workers become too expensive. This creates a huge incentive to move manufacturing to cheaper countries. And just like that, the empire stops being the world's workshop and becomes its biggest customer. Self-sufficiency is replaced by dependence. For the United States, this has been playing out for over 40 years. Entire industries, from clothing to electronics to steel, were packed up and shipped overseas. This wasn't just about losing jobs. It was a catastrophic loss of our ability to make things and a loss of our national resilience. The same nation that outproduced the rest of the world combined in World War II became dependent on its rivals, especially China, for everything from iPhones to the basic ingredients in our medicines. The result is a massive chronic trade deficit. For decades, the United States has imported way more than it exports. This means we consume more wealth than we produce. An imbalance that is only possible because the rest of the world agrees to accept our US dollars in exchange for their actual goods and services. But this deal, often called the dollar's exorbitant privilege, has slowly turned America into a hollowed-out consumer, totally reliant on the productivity of others. This reliance creates huge strategic weaknesses. The COVID-19 pandemic threw this into sharp relief. When global supply chains broke, we suddenly couldn't get masks, ventilators, or other essential medical gear because they were mostly made in China. It was a brutal wake-up call, proving that the United States could no longer provide even the most basic things for its own people in a crisis. This hollowing out process perfectly mirrors the decline of other great powers. Britain, once the world's factory, saw its industrial power evaporate as it focused on finance and managing its empire, only to be lapped by the industrial might of Germany and the US. In its golden age, Spain got fantastically rich from the gold and silver it plundered from the Americas, but it completely neglected its own industries. That flood of gold created crazy inflation and made it cheaper to buy goods from other countries than to make them at home. When the gold rush ended, the Spanish economy collapsed because there was nothing real left. An empire that doesn't make things is an empire living on borrowed time. Stage 5, the dangerous phase, internal fracture. This is it. This is the stage where all the rot, the economic decay, the financial games, the social inequality, boils over into a full-blown political and cultural civil war. This is the dangerous phase. It's defined by a total loss of national unity, where the country literally turns on itself. The bonds of trust, shared values, and common identity that hold a society together start to snap. The United States has, without a doubt, entered this stage. The most obvious symptom is extreme political polarization. The political system stops being a way to solve the nation's problems and becomes a zero-sum deathmatch. Compromise is seen as weakness, and political opponents aren't just rivals, they're enemies of the state. Events like the storming of the Capitol on January 6th aren't just isolated incidents. They are signs of a deep, dangerous fracture in the country's political soul. This political war is a direct reflection of the social war fueled by that staggering wealth gap we talked about. When a huge part of the population feels like the system is rigged, that their future is bleak, while a tiny elite hoards obscene amounts of wealth, the social contract breaks. You see the results everywhere: rising social unrest, spikes in crime, and a general feeling of anger and despair. Another flashing red light is the collapse of trust in our institutions. Trust in the government, the media, the justice system, and even science has cratered to historic lows. Recent Gallup polling from 2025 showed that a record 45% of Americans now identify as political independents, a clear rejection of the entire two-party system. When people stop believing in the legitimacy of the institutions that run their lives, the whole system becomes dangerously unstable. History gives us a chilling parallel here: the late Roman Republic. Right before it collapsed into a dictatorship, Rome was torn apart by brutal civil wars, extreme political hatred between factions, and the rise of demagogues who weaponized public anger to seize power. Roman society split along class and political lines until the Republic was simply ungovernable. While Rome's full decline took centuries, this final phase of internal fracture was a chaotic, violent, and rapid spiral toward collapse. The symptoms are identical: a divided elite, an angry population, and a complete loss of a shared vision for the future. At this stage, even good decisions arrive too late. An empire can survive foreign enemies, but no empire survives tearing itself apart. Stage 6. The world questions the currency. The second to last stage in an empire's collapse is an attack on the source of its ultimate power, its money. For America, the dollar's role as the world's main reserve currency has been the foundation of its global power since World War II. It allows us to buy whatever we want from the world in our own currency and to fund our massive debts cheaply. When the world starts to lose faith in the dollar, the final pillar of American power starts to shake. This process is called de-dollarization, and it's not a theory anymore. It's happening right now, and it's speeding up. This doesn't mean the dollar collapses tomorrow. It means the foundation is no longer unquestioned. America's geopolitical rivals, like Russia and China, are openly working to build a new financial system that doesn't use the dollar. For instance, according to recent reports, now well over 90% of trade between Russia and China is settled in their own currencies, the ruble and the yuan. This isn't just symbolic, it's a direct challenge to America's financial chokehold on the world. The BRICS group of nations, which has been expanding, is openly talking about creating its own reserve currency to compete with the dollar. These countries represent a huge slice of the world's population and economy, and their collective shift away from the dollar is a tectonic plate moving under the global financial system. So why now? It's a direct result of the stages we just covered. First, the US has increasingly used the dollar as a weapon through sanctions, cutting countries like Russia out of the global system. This sent a loud message to everyone else. If you get on Washington's bad side, your dollar assets can be frozen overnight. This has pushed even allies to look for ways to be less vulnerable. Second, the insane levels of debt and money printing have made other countries nervous about the dollar's long-term value. Nations holding trillions of US dollars are watching its buying power get eaten away by inflation and are starting to swap those dollars for other assets like gold. Losing reserve currency status doesn't happen all at once, but when it hits a tipping point, the consequences are catastrophic. It would mean our borrowing costs would skyrocket, the American standard of living would plummet, and the exorbitant privilege that has defined the last 80 years would be over. The questioning of the currency is the world casting a vote of no confidence in the future of the empire. Stage 7. The breaking point. The final stage of the death cycle isn't a slow fade, it's the breaking point. It's a rapid cascading failure where all the pressure that's been building up for years finally converges, and the whole system unravels with shocking speed. Decades of slow decay can end in a collapse that takes just a few years, or even months. This is what most people get wrong about imperial decline. They expect a gentle sunset, but history shows it's often more like a sudden, violent snap. The breaking point is a chain reaction. For example, a crisis of faith in the dollar could cause foreign countries to start dumping US debt. That would cause interest rates to spike, making it impossible for the government to pay its bills. The government would face a choice: either default on the debt, a global economic apocalypse, or forced the central bank to print money at an insane rate, triggering hyperinflation. That financial crisis would instantly become a social and political one. Hyperinflation would vaporize the savings of the middle class, leading to mass protests and riots. The political system, already crippled by division, would be totally unable to respond. Faith in institutions would hit zero. The government might be forced to take desperate measures, like freezing bank accounts or suspending normal political life, which would only speed up the final collapse. Analysts who study these cycles point out that the final break is often triggered when three forces hit at the same time: a massive debt crisis, severe internal political conflict, and the rise of a powerful external rival. The United States is currently staring down all three. While it's impossible to predict the exact trigger or the timeline, the critical thing to understand is that the period of maximum danger isn't decades away. It's in the coming years. The fall of the Soviet Union is the perfect modern example. In 1985, almost no one predicted that the entire Soviet Empire would be gone 6 years later. It seemed permanent, right up until the moment it wasn't. The breaking point is when the system's fragility, hidden for years, is suddenly and catastrophically exposed for everyone to see. So, let's recap. We've walked through the historical pattern of rise and fall that has claimed every great power. It starts with the illusion of permanence, the psychological trap that every empire falls into at its peak. We saw how that arrogance leads to military overstretch, which bleeds the nation of its money and focus. We looked at the financial rot that follows, as debt and fantasy money replace real production. This hollows out a nation's industrial strength, leaving it fragile and dependent on its rivals. And all of this leads to the dangerous phase, the internal fracture, where a nation loses its way and declares war on itself. We are living in that phase right now. You can see it in our political paralysis, our social anger, and the crumbling trust in the very institutions meant to hold us together. From here, the historical map shows the final stages, the world losing faith in the currency, and then the sudden breaking point. The parallels to empires like Rome and Britain aren't just interesting trivia. They are screaming red alerts. The question isn't if the United States is in decline. The evidence is overwhelming. The real question is whether that decline is a death sentence. History shows that while this cycle is incredibly powerful, it isn't always destiny. The United States still has enormous strengths, a culture of innovation, vast resources, a geographic advantage, and a deep well of talent. A renewal is theoretically possible, but it would take a monumental nationwide effort to change course, to get a handle on the debt, to start the hard work of rebuilding our industries, and most importantly, to somehow bridge the toxic divide that has torn the country apart and find a new shared purpose. But history also offers a sobering reality check. Almost no empire has ever successfully pulled itself back from this stage. The political will to make such painful fundamental changes is almost always missing in a system this broken and captured by special interests. The path of least resistance is to just keep managing the decline, patching the cracks, and kicking the can down the road until the road runs out. What do you think is the most important lesson we can learn from the fall of past empires? Is America's story already written, or can this cycle be broken? Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you want to keep exploring the big picture forces that are really shaping our world, make sure you're subscribed and have the notification bell clicked. Thanks for watching.